I watched you every night because something in your silence called out to a part of me I didn't know still existed. I watched you every night, not for comfort, but because your presence made my fears feel less powerful. I watched you every night because even the way you sighed felt like a language my heart understood. I watched you every night, not to fantasize, but because I felt safer in the world when you were in it. I watched you every night because your glow reached me even on the days I felt completely invisible. I watched you every night, not because I had to, but because my soul refused to turn away from you. I watched you every night because the way you existed made life feel a little less unfair. I watched you every night, not to admire your beauty, but to study the softness in your spirit. I watched you every night because you carried a quiet strength I needed to learn from. I watched you every night, not because I was captivated, but because your energy held me like a secret. I watched you every night because your face reminded me of the peace I kept losing. I watched you every night not for the thrill, but for the strange calm that washed over me when you appeared. I watched you every night because you moved with a grace that made my chaos feel seen. I watched you every night, not to seek answers, but because you felt like the answer I never asked for. I watched you every night because your presence eased a loneliness I never admitted I had. I watched you every night, not to escape reality, but because you made reality feel less cruel. I watched you every night because your smile carried a warmth I wished I could touch. I watched you every night, not because I was drawn to your beauty, but because your soul felt familiar. I watched you every night because something about you felt like a story I wasn't done reading. I watched you every night not because I wanted to, but because looking away felt impossible. I watched you every night because your existence taught me more about love than anything I've ever lived through. I watched you every night, not to judge, but because your vulnerability mirrored my own. I watched you every night because your presence stitched together pieces of me I thought were broken forever. I watched you every night, not for entertainment, but because being near your light helped me see myself. I watched you every night because the world felt softer when you smiled. I watched you every night, not because I was lost, but because you felt like the direction I couldn't name. I watched you every night because you made the darkness feel less threatening. I watched you every night not for distraction, but because you felt like the moment everything finally made sense. I watched you every night because your laughter echoed in places inside me that had been silent for too long. I watched you every night, not because I needed you, but because you made me believe I was allowed to need someone again. I watched you every night because you made my heart remember things it tried to forget. I watched you every night not for answers, but because your presence soothed questions I didn't dare ask. I watched you every night because you felt like the calm hidden underneath 1,000 storms. I watched you every night, not because I was curious, but because you were the one thing that didn't feel temporary. I watched you every night because your existence felt like a blessing I didn't know how to receive. I watched you every night, not for comfort, but because your presence made me brave. I watched you every night because your light found me in places even I couldn't reach. I watched you every night, not for closeness, but because watching you felt like being held. I watched you every night because your soul glowed in ways that made the whole world dim. I watched you every night, not because I couldn't help it, but because something in you awakened something sleeping in me. I watched you every night because you made my world feel less empty without even trying. I watched you every night not because I desired you, but because you reminded me what desire feels like. I watched you every night because your softness reached parts of me I thought were permanently hardened. I watched you every night, not for romance, but because you made my heart feel safe again. I watched you every night because you made me believe I wasn't invisible. I watched you every night, not because you were flawless, but because your flaws felt beautifully honest. I watched you every night because something in you felt like destiny brushing against my soul. I watched you every night, not because I had nothing better to do, but because nothing felt better than witnessing you. I watched you every night because your existence felt like a promise that tomorrow could be gentler. I watched you every night, and trust me, it wasn't just for fun. Something in me was learning how to breathe again just by seeing you. I watched you every night, not to entertain myself, but because you became the only peaceful moment in my chaotic mind. I watched you every night, and it wasn't for amusement. Your presence was the only thing that kept my loneliness from swallowing me whole. I watched you every night because seeing you felt like holding on to the last piece of warmth left in my life. I watched you every night, not out of curiosity, but because something in your soul kept whispering to mine. I watched you every night, and I swear it wasn't for fun. I was trying to understand why your existence felt like a promise I never asked for. I watched you every night because the way you moved through the world felt like poetry guiding me back to myself. I watched you every night not to pass time, but because you reminded me of the version of me I thought I lost. I watched you every night because your silence was louder than the noise in my own head. I watched you every night, not to waste hours, but because something about you made time finally feel worth spending. I watched you every night because your smile felt like a secret the universe only shared with me. I watched you every night not because I was bored, but because you unknowingly became the one thing I looked forward to. I watched you every night because the world felt softer when you appeared in it. I watched you every night, and believe me, it wasn't entertainment. You became my escape, my calm, my heartbeat. I watched you every night because your existence made mine feel less heavy. I watched you every night, not for fun, but because you became the only truth in a life full of lies. I watched you every night because the way you simply existed felt like a prayer answered. I watched you every night, not to be intrusive, but because something in your eyes told stories I wished I could live in. I watched you every night because my soul recognized something in you it couldn't ignore. I watched you every night, not for pleasure, but because you felt like a memory I couldn't let myself forget. I watched you every night because you reminded me what it feels like to feel something again. I watched you every night not because I had nothing else to do, but because nothing else made sense without you. I watched you every night because somehow you made loneliness feel less terrifying. I watched you every night, not for entertainment, but because your presence quieted the storms in my mind. I watched you every night because your existence felt like a thread pulling me out of darkness. I watched you every night, not because I was obsessed, but because you were the only thing that didn't disappoint me. I watched you every night because seeing you breathe reminded me I could too. I watched you every night not to invade your world, but because you became the only part of reality I wanted to stay connected to. I watched you every night because your light reached places inside me no one else ever touched. I watched you every night, not out of curiosity, but out of a longing I couldn't explain. I watched you every night because the sound of your laughter stayed with me longer than my own thoughts. I watched you every night, not because I wanted to, but because my heart refused to look away. I watched you every night because something about you felt like home, even from a distance. I watched you every night, not because I needed distraction, but because you became my reason. I watched you every night because you made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was still capable of love. I watched you every night, not for the thrill, but for the quiet comfort that only you unknowingly gave me. I watched you every night because every moment you existed felt like a miracle I wasn't prepared for. I watched you every night, not to judge, but to admire the way your soul carried itself. I watched you every night because your presence made my world stop spinning long enough to feel steady again. I watched you every night not because you were perfect, but because your imperfections felt real in a world full of masks. I watched you every night because somewhere between your smiles and silences, I found a version of myself I missed. I watched you every night, not to make memories, but because you became the memory I never wanted to lose. I watched you every night because your existence lit up the shadows clinging to my thoughts. I watched you every night, not to understand you, but because you helped me understand myself. I watched you every night because your life reminded me mine wasn't completely falling apart. I watched you every night, not because I was lonely, but because you made loneliness feel less cruel. I watched you every night because the way you lived your life taught me how to breathe again.